I think we're all familiar with the character of Noah from the Old Testament, the guy that lived to 950 years old, surely enough to give any pension fund manager a heart attack on the spot. We're all familiar with the idea of this global flood that this guy had to deal with. There are loads of videos on YouTube talking about all the arguments we can make against that flood. I'm not going to remake one of those videos this time. I want to look at the time after the flood. Let's assume that the flood really happened. Let's assume that Noah dealt with it, that he built the ark, he had the animals on it. What happened after the flood? Of course, the immediate problem Noah had to deal with after the flood was repatriating the animals with where they came from, taking the polar bears back to the North Pole and the penguins back to the South Pole, and all the other animals in between. Of course, it wasn't just a case of dropping them off, because all their habitats had gone. There was no polar ice caps anymore for the polar bears and for the penguins and for the ice fish and all these kinds of things, for the seals. There was no, in the desert, for those sand lizards that lift their feet up and all the other desert inhabitants, there was no sand. You know, the orangutans wouldn't have had any trees to swing from because there was no jungle. So he had to try and get all those ecosystems back up and running again, which would have been quite some undertaking. I'm not really sure how he managed to do that, but let's imagine he managed to do that. Then he would have got back to his own land. That's when the real problems kicked in for Noah. Just imagine now that you and your family, imagine you and your family land on a deserted island. Think of the problems that you would face. You'd need to grow some crops, find something. First you just try and gather some food, then you turn to some kind of agriculture, maybe kill some animals for some food. You'd need to find yourself some fresh water. Bear in mind that Noah wouldn't have been able to find any fresh water probably for quite some time, because even after it started to rain there would be no river channels. All that would have been washed away. There would have been no animals for him to eat. The animals that had already died would be rotten. The animals that were alive he couldn't eat. He had to give them a chance to breed. He couldn't have planted any crops because he didn't have any crops to plant. And even if he'd saved some seeds to plant, there was no topsoil, there was nothing to plant any crops in. How he managed to get through those first few decades, nobody really knows, but he did manage to get through it, so it would seem. One thing we can be certain of is that in those kind of subsistence conditions, those terrible conditions, the population could not have expanded greatly. It would have took them all their time, Noah, his wife and his 3 children and their wives, just to keep going. We rely very much on infrastructure. When there's big disasters now, we rely on infrastructure from around the world to bail people out, to help them out. Even small tribes have a surprising amount of infrastructure and people with specialist tasks. There's no infrastructure for Noah. There was nobody to support him. There were no specialist tasks other than what he and his family already had. This was quite a problem. So just like a small tribe in South America, the population isn't growing very quickly. You wouldn't expect that to happen to Noah. But I want to look at the population between Noah and Abraham and just imagine what could have happened with that population. So let's look at those generations between Noah and Abraham. As we look at this list, we can see that there are 10 generational jumps. This is the actual lineage that links Noah with Abraham, a period since the flood and to the birth of Abraham of 290 years, not a very long period of time. I've already said to you that it would be very much a subsistence existence. It wouldn't be surprising if by the time you got to Abraham there weren't many more than maybe a couple of dozen people. That's how hard things would have been. But let's be generous, because that just makes a nonsense of everything if we say that. I'm going to give 2 examples. One is that every generation, the population of that generation is twice that of previous, and that the generational population has trebled. For the generational population to treble, that means that for every 2 parents, for every couple, you have to have 6 offspring. 6 offspring, and bear in mind there would be very high infant mortality. This is 6 of your offspring have to make it to adulthood and have children of their own. So these are the 2 examples. Let's look at the doubles example first. You can see that in the doubles example there's about 3,000 people in that final generation. Even if you assume that the couple of previous generations are still alive, that's still only about 5,000 people. Well, that's not even enough people for me to warrant making a video about. So let's look at the treble example just for the sake of the video, and for the sake of the Bible, and for the sake of the Abrahamic faiths. Let's assume it trebles. We get about 120,000 people in that Abrahamic generation. If we add a couple of generations onto it, we get about 170,000 people. This is still a pathetically small number of people. Okay, that buzzing there, that was my mobile phone. It wasn't a sex toy, just to get that straight. This situation actually gets worse. Because when you read about Abraham, there seems to be quite a lot of civilization going on. It seems to be quite a bustling place. It doesn't seem to be a place with only 170,000 people. But the reason it gets worse is because we have to actually split these people up. Because Noah had 3 sons. He had Shem, Ham and Japheth. Japheth went north. He made the European peoples. Ham, he made all the black races of the world are descended from Ham and the Egyptians, according to the Psalms. And Shemite, Semite, ring any bells? We're talking about the Arabs and the Jews. They're descended from Shem. So for these people to have been descended from these specific 3 individuals, there couldn't have been any interbreeding. So if we assume that Shem's descendants were a third of this number, we're talking about just about less than 60,000 people. Less than 60,000 people, less than the population of a British town made up the population of this entire Sumerian culture which Abraham was born into. Abraham was born in a city, the city of Ur, west of the Euphrates, in Sumer. And for every city you have towns and you have villages and you have hamlets, all in 60,000 people. Doesn't really seem very realistic, does it? Just let me read you something from the Bible. This is from Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord had said to Abraham, get yourself out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house. His father had just died. To a land that I will show you. Well, one of the places Abraham went on his travels was Egypt. And there was a pharaoh and there were princes of pharaohs. And there was an entire civilization. An entire civilization in how many people exactly? If the descendants of Ham had gone there, well, that was only 60,000, but the descendants of Ham had also spurred off to form the black races of the world. You know, the Africans and the Aborigines and all these different people. Wow, so how many people could this Egyptian empire have actually consisted of? 10,000? 15,000? It's barely the size of a large village. It really doesn't make any sense, does it? It actually, I'm sorry to say it, but it gets worse. Let me show you a little table here with some timelines just to show you why. And this is the really startling thing. Here we can see the timeline of Noah and Abraham, their lifespans, and where the flood occurred. Note there's some overlap in these things, but I want you, before we get embroiled in that, just to think about who Noah was following the flood. He was the father of everybody. He really was the daddy. You know, and everything everybody knew would have stemmed from Noah. He was the person with the link to the past. He would have had all the wisdom. He was the person who'd spoken to God. He was the person that had took humanity through the flood and kept the chain going. What an incredible person. I think in Noah's lifetime it's inconceivable that anybody in the world, especially still in the region, in Noah's Sumerian heartland, would have gone against Noah and started worshipping anything else. It's absolutely inconceivable. Well, Abraham got this message that I read to you, Genesis chapter 12:1. He got this message 15 years after Noah died. Noah died when Abraham was 60. Abraham got this message at 75. Let me read you something. This is from Joshua 24:2, in fact. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah, and his sons Abraham and Nahor, Abraham had a brother, Nahor, served other gods. That's right. In Abraham's first 60-odd years of his life, first 75 years of his life, in fact, until Yahweh had appeared to him, he served other gods. His father served other gods. His father's father served other gods. They all served other gods. Well, which other gods did they serve? Any clues there? Do you think it may just have been the gods of Noah? Just maybe? I don't think there's any other possible explanation, is there, given the status of Noah? It's only with Noah's death that other gods could actually appear on the scene. So the startling news of all of this is that the God of Abraham, the God of the Jews, the God of Israel, the God of the Christians, the God of the Muslims, the Abrahamic deity Yahweh, is not the God of Noah, is not the God of Adam and Eve, is not the creator God, is not the God of the first part of the book of Genesis. Now, I mean, how crushing to the Bible is that? What a crushing revelation that's contained in the Bible itself. Thank you for listening to this video.